Hello, and welcome to the Emancipated Citizen Podcast. I'm Ben Snow,
And I am Zachal Reyes.
and today we are interviewing Stephen Watt from Northern Lights Canada, as well as Shams and John. If you watched Zach's videos, will probably remember Stephen. Would you three like to tell us what you guys do?
Yeah, my name is Shams Irfan. I am originally from Afghanistan. I was sponsored to Canada in 2019, in late 2000, and I got accepted in 2022, and I came to Canada also in the same year, in 2022, in March. Today is my first anniversary
Really?
in Canada. Yes.
Happy anniversary!
Which is really good. And I'm having this interview from the land of freedom
And snow.
and snow. It was really good.
White as snow. Yeah.
Storm and snow, beautiful day. I work at George Brown College as a writer in residence, and Stephen, John, Javed Najafi, Ali Riza, and we have one other advisor, and we started another project called Humans in Flight. It is a collection of picture and first-hand stories of refugees who have made tremendous contribution to Canadian society after coming to Canada. And also we use this platform to tell the stories of helpers and Canadians who took a second chance on the lives of people who lived in limbo and instead of constant uncertainty for 9 to 10 years. So I am one of those refugees who lived in Indonesian detention center for 8.5 years after escaping a drag attack on my life from the Taliban in Afghanistan. I think that's enough.
Okay.
John,
Go
ahead.
Mike.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
So I am John Junaid, and I am originally from Burma, and I came from like Rohingya community. That's one of the most persecuted community in Myanmar. So in 2012, when the conflict happened, there was a genocidal attack against the Rohingyas. I had to leave the country, and I tried to seek refuge in Australia, but I couldn't make it there because of the Australia's deterrent policy. I then sought refuge in Indonesia, where I was kind of trapped for almost 8 years. And then we did some advocacy to raise our awareness of the situations. And through the advocacy, we sort of, got help to as to get a sponsor to Canada. So I came to Canada like in 2019 on September 2019. So since then I've been like
22,
19,
21.
oh 2021, yeah, sorry, yeah, September 2021. And since coming to Canada, I've been like writing here and there, like in a lot of media publications, and trying my best to use all kind of tool to advocate for refugees. And because the refugees situation has remained one of the unaddressed, like widely unaddressed issue, and many people believe that they know enough about refugee, but the truth is people really don't know enough about the refugee. They might know about the refugee, but they don't know what's happening internally about the refugees. They don't know what the governments and the NGOs and all these systems are doing to refugees. They believe that the system is created to help refugees, but rather it's sort of like prosecuted them in a different way, this system that we created for refugees. So my goal of, in this stand is to address how the system is not, helping refugees, rather further victimizing them in their own situations. So that sort of thing I'm trying to like raise the awareness of in my work. So right now, like I am now like studying journalism and while working, at the college. So I guess that's pretty much. And yeah, we are also working with the Women's in Flight, and the goal of this project is to raise the refugees awareness to basically bring as many refugees as possible to Canada, and their sponsorship is one of the best programs that Canada has to offer to the world, right? So we are using this opportunity to help to some of the most deserving refugees in the world who might not have any other second chance otherwise.
Okay, my turn.
Yep.
So yeah, my name is Stephen Watt. I am co-founder of Northern Lights Canada, which is a not-for-profit that exists to promote the private sponsorship program of refugees here in Canada. And through that work, I've come in contact with a lot of very dynamic, amazing people who either are or were refugees, including the guys I'm sitting with now. So I would see them as a kind of prime example of just how much people who are classified as refugees have to offer the world. Because these guys have started entirely new journalism project called the Archipelago. Since coming to Canada, they've continued to be big speakers and advocates and writers. So Shams tomorrow is a guest speaker at an event actually organized by Syrians to bridge the gap between newcomers and our Indigenous people. And John is published in CBC all over the place. So this is kind of brain gain. And I think when you look at sort of other countries like the US and Australia that treat refugees like handicap their existence in their countries, when they look at how our guys are doing and they're shocked, like, oh my gosh, they're working, they're on national TV, they're doing all sorts of amazing stuff. Why can't we have that? And it's because you don't let them, right? You don't let people work and succeed and have an equal standing with the native born people, then you're losing out. Your economy is losing out. Your culture is losing out. You are losing out. So that's something I've really come to appreciate over the years of the people that I've helped bring here, is just how amazing they are and gifted they are, and often more driven to succeed and contribute than your average native born person, because they've been unable to work or study officially or all sorts of things for years. So there's a lot of pent up energy and a lot to offer the world. So when they come to Canada, they hit the ground running. It's quite amazing to witness.
Yeah.
If I can add something about Stephen, he might be the reason for so many things happening for refugees, to be honest, at some point. It might not be the direct impact. What the advocacy he is doing is sort of like create the awareness everywhere. And he's sort of like educator to many Canadians and many people. And honestly, he's the reason why we are all here. Like a lot of us are here. So we want to thank him for that. Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome.
Yes.
But while John goes and finishes our breakfast, I just want to put one big caveat for our listeners. So I get a lot of requests to sort of, help me. I'm in Afghanistan and I'm being persecuted and I can't help. I'm not I'm not the government of Canada. And there's all sorts of things that somebody needs to have to qualify for private sponsorship. And one is official refugee status from the UNHCR or another country. Some countries give them out themselves. And they need to have sponsors and they need to have funding because the money has to sit in the bank as part of the application. So there's a lot, and you need to be a refugee. A refugee means you're not in your home country, you're in another country, and somebody's giving you refugee status. So I don't want to mislead people into thinking that I'm, some giant NGO, I'm just one dude. Everyone else in the organization, they're all just ordinary volunteers. My day job is not this at all. My day job is working at a business school. So if people are, hopefully people won't listen to this podcast and then send me a million messages to get help or I can't. I'm just an ordinary Joe. But if somebody is lucky enough to have the refugee card and the full one, not asylum seeker, and they have funding from somewhere, and that's like 16,500 Canadian per person, that has to go in a trust account as part of the application. and they have sponsors, 5 people who live in the same city in Canada or community and not in Quebec. So you can see how many limitations there are to this program. But if they magically have all that, then I'm very happy to sort of facilitate the rest of the process by talking to the sponsors, telling them what to do, how to do the paperwork. That is largely what I do for during the day.
I mean, I and Ben have worked for the Atheist Support Network as well. I've also been involved in other programs, involved in, helping refugees in different places, in different situations, with different kinds of strategies and all of that. And it is something that people should always keep in mind, of course, that, we're not governments, we're not giant NGOs even. We don't have that many resources, and there's always going to be so many more people who need help than the number of people who can actually receive it. We can try our best to do what we can, provide direction, but there is absolutely no guarantee that we can save anyone, so to speak, right? The main responsibility always falls on the individual who's affected by their situation. You can't be reliant on other people, unfortunately.
Yeah. Now that said, you just touched on a theme that we were just talking about, which is that the people who manage to make it out of their refugee state, I don't want to blame the victim and say, oh, if you're a refugee, you didn't try hard enough, but people who do make it out usually make it out because they use their own sort of internal resources to make it happen. And these guys who we're with today were kind of prominent activists in Indonesia. So if you're a private sponsor, an average Canadian, you're probably going to hear from them and about them more than somebody else who maybe is quieter or doesn't have great English skills or doesn't have great social media skills or doesn't have great people skills. If you have all those things, you have a higher chance of getting out and succeeding because you're going to make those opportunities happen. That is why I think of the people that we know through this work, they really index very high for achieving and resilience and so on and so forth, because that's what gets you out. It's not that every refugee is a superstar, but the superstars tend to find the opportunities to get out, which is why here in Canada, we were very lucky to sort of welcome these people as permanent residents because they have so much to contribute. And not everybody is like a, nationally published journalist. Even if you're doing construction or starting a business, 1,000 ways to contribute. And if you give people the equal opportunity to make those contributions, they sure will.
Yeah. And the person I got involved in refugee stuff with is a Syrian who is working 12 to 14-hour days in retail to support his mother and 2 half-siblings in Egypt. Yeah, I think I'm the only one who knows about him, and, the people who listen to our video with him on Zach's channel a couple of years ago.
Yeah, to reinforce the point, it's not a matter of blame, right? People don't put themselves in situations where they have to be refugees and all of that, but for better or for worse, it is like your situation is your responsibility, because the world isn't structured in such a way to that other people are gonna get you out of those bad situations all the time, especially if you're not already in a developed country with all of those helping resources. And also, so Stephen, we I think the last time we talked on a platform was back in 2019. I don't want to say anything that I might have misremembered or something, but as far as I can remember, you hadn't had as much experience as you have now, or you hadn't been able to help a lot of people at that point. You were still kind of starting up. You were in contact with several refugees in different places, and within the last 4 years, things have seem to have taken off a lot more. You've been able to accomplish a lot more since the last time we talked. Can you comment on that? Can you maybe tell us about this journey, how things developed, just tell us about the development of this project and how you got to where you are now.
Sure. So I started out back in 2016, and it was like a lot of Canadians. I got involved in private sponsorship as a response to the Syrian crisis. So I was part of a group that was trying to think of how to deal with the 45,000 Syrians who were sort of en route to Canada at the time. And we ended up realizing that we could sponsor people ourselves as part of this community organization. So 2016 was a lot of applications for Syrian families. And once I did a few applications, I realized this is really hard. I should be able to help other people so that they don't have to go through this vast learning curve that I had to go through. So then I started sort of lending my hand as facilitator for other sponsor groups. And then about a year and a half ago, I think it was October 2021, a friend of mine whose name is Javid Elam, who is the author of Escape from Manus or Escape from Manus Prison, he was the one who urged me to actually start an organization. So the two of us co-founded this organization with another woman named Ruth Elizabeth Bromstein. And the point of the organization, which is called Northern Lights Canada, is to sort of scale up what I was doing individually by having a website, having a Facebook page, having a lot of resources. And that has kind of broadened the impact of this volunteer work. So there's now a lot of people who are volunteers as part of this organization, and they've gone on and spread the word, and so now the name of this organization is out there, and we've got applications being submitted coast to coast outside of Quebec, and we've got volunteers coast to coast outside of Quebec. Quebec has its own immigration policy. That's why I'm mentioning Quebec. So it's been interesting. We've had some sort of media moments that have also gotten the word out. So, if you keep volunteering, you'll end up with like a few famous cases on your hand. So Hassan Kantar was one of them. He was the guy who was stuck in the airport in Malaysia. Javid himself was another one. There's another guy named Amr Hossein Sargard, who was one of the first people off of Manus to be sponsored to Canada. So and then there's been other sort of interventions like Afghanistan, helping with the interpreters and embassy workers. So the media thing, every time there's a media story, we get like a whole bunch of new volunteers, and that has spread the word as well. So yeah, it's gotten bigger. What the focus over the last 2 years, I would say, has been largely Hazara refugees from Afghanistan and largely in Indonesia. Part of the reason for that is they have the refugee cards that they need to be sponsored by a group of 5, which in most countries are unavailable, those refugee cards. So yeah, there's been a lot of Hazara Afghans, and I think one of the things I'm most proud of is Canadians have never, I would say, heard of Hazara Afghans, and that includes me a couple of years ago. And the ones who were sponsored were largely sponsored by friends and family. And I think the thing I'm most proud of is that we've now got Canadians lining up to sponsor Hazara Afghan refugees with no connection to them, like other than sort of friendships built on social media. So the more we can sort of continue that work, it gives me great satisfaction. Now, we still are sponsoring Syrians, LGBT, people from Manus, Persian Christians, Middle Eastern gay and trans. That work still continues, but I would say the bulk of the work is now on sponsoring Hazara Afghans. And we have an entire website devoted to it, which is called Hazara Hope or Hazara Refugee Collective, which I encourage you to check out.
Since Stephen mentioned it, let's give the audience just a brief overview of it, like what the issue is, why they're being specifically targeted by the Taliban, and the difficulties that they're facing, and where they even come from, what they are.
Briefly, yeah.
So yeah, Shams, could you elaborate a little bit about the Hazara community and why they've been facing particular difficulty under the Taliban?
Let me start with an awful memory that I had with my teacher back home in Afghanistan at school. He asked all the students, including me, what we wanted to become in the future. And I told him that I want to become a TV presenter or to host a program on TV. And then he said, "Son, your face is not standard for TV. You don't have a standard face to appear on TV. You have a flat nose, your eyes are small, and that's kind of true. I look different, and I belong to an ethnic group in Afghanistan that has totally different facial appearance and physical outlook. So that has been a problem in the eyes of the Taliban. And because of how I look, and because I think differently, because I want to become a journalist, or because I want to become an engineer, or a writer, or I want to work to defend the human rights issue in Afghanistan, that has been a problem.
So when it comes to ethnic identifiers, from what I've heard and to kind of reiterate what you're saying, Hazara people like have different ethnic markers, so to say, or things that people would ethnically identify them differently with, like facial features that are more similar to East Asians than like Persians, which is more like the rest of Afghanistan, right? Is there also a religious element to it? Why is it specifically
One
the
of the
Taliban?
other reasons that Hazara people have faced ethnic cleansing and persecution is because they are a religious minority group in Afghanistan. A religious minority group. In terms of population, they are not minority. They make up more than 40% of Afghanistan population. But because they are a religious minority and they have different social, religious, and political perspective, and they look different to other people and think differently, and that jeopardized their life, and there has always been discrimination against them because of how they look and because how they think differently from
Yeah,
other
and
ethnic.
are Hazaras more tendentially Shia?
They are Shia Muslim. Mainly, there are two major religious sects: Sunni Muslim and Shia Muslim, and other ethnicities. That three ethnicities that make up half of Afghanistan population, or more than half of Afghanistan population. They are Sunni Muslim, and Hazara people are Shia Muslim.
Okay, so that probably has also a significant part of this issue, right? So yeah, I just wanted to briefly introduce this issue to people who might not be familiar with it. Even though it's not the topic for today's episode, and we would very much like to have a special episode to talk about the Hazara community and in Afghanistan, their history, their struggles, and how things have been under the Taliban, and yeah, maybe how things can be made better in the future, right?
And for the Rohingya too, of course.
Absolutely, the
Among
Rohingya issue is something that I and Ben have privately been talking about for a while, and like planning to maybe do something on this podcast about it. Given, of course, that we have a well-informed and active guest for it that present a native and well-informed perspective on the issue.
The religious element of persecution is pretty often involved in many situations. So John, it comes from the Rohingya group, and they are traditionally more Muslim in a Buddhist majority country, which is Burma, and that religious difference often becomes a pretext or an excuse for violence. And I would say that the religious differences aren't themselves the problem typically in most situations, but they're used as a club to beat the minority basically by saying, oh, look, your faith is different, you're therefore not human. And so that has happened in Burma as well. I mean, John knows better than me, but it's part of that process of dehumanization. And we were talking today about how it's a kind of classic process of genocide, including here in Canada, where with our Indigenous people, where you sort of first impose a culture on the people who've been there for thousands of years. And then you say, because you don't fit the culture, you're not human. And if you want to be human, you have to sort of adapt to our culture, take our names, our beliefs. And that sets the pretext for what later becomes land clearing, land grabbing, and then actual physical violence. In the case of Burma, actual killing of people and burning down their villages. It's a very well laid out methodical strategy that people use to sort of conquer and wipe out other people, and it's happening worldwide in many countries.
I think on that note, very briefly, in Afghanistan, the Hazara people are not just being murdered, and there is not like a mass targeted killing of Hazara people, but also there is a culture genocide. It's not only coming and killing you and physically wiping you or eliminating you, ignoring your physical existence, but it is also genocide, is also criticizing your perspective, damaging your culture, not giving you the opportunity to speak your own language.
Yeah, you mean marginalizing your culture.
Yeah, they're just not killing, but they are denying our language, our culture, and they are displacing their own way of living, their own culture, their own identity and language.
I mean, in certain cases, but certainly also in a lot of other cases, there is killing and violence that's happening against the Hazara community as well, right?
Yeah, and slightly off topic, what I found the most striking was how right after the U.S. left Afghanistan, ISIS-K used a Uyghur suicide bomber to attack Hazaras to make a statement against China. That's just how something like that could happen.
No, it's the Taliban themselves. It is another political, discussion and topic that is totally different. Like the withdrawal was very stupid. It was not thoughtful. It is always the Taliban and other terrorist network that worked together in collaboration, targeting the Hazara people, and killing them. And this continued for centuries. It started a long time ago, and it continues. It does not stop here. Even when the Taliban claimed that if the foreigners would leave Afghanistan, peace prevails, and there will be safety, people will have freedom, and there will be no more attack on minorities. But here we are now, Taliban ruling the country. But still, the Hazara people are the primary target of the terrorists, the ISIS and the Taliban themselves. Nothing has changed. I mean, there is no end to the persecution and to the suffering of Hazara people.
Anyway, on to the topic of how people can help people like Shams and John. At this point, we should probably go into how Canadian sponsorship works.
Yeah, Stephen can tell you about that, but so I came to Canada through a private sponsorship program too. It all started with Northern Lights, educating the Canadians how they can be, useful and impactful. It's people often think that as an individual they cannot make a difference in the life of the people. But when an organization like Northern Lights comes and says, okay, I have a solution, individuals can make a difference. And that's what happens. Stephen and other volunteers and other Canadians are introducing the people living in limbo, introducing their talent, how they can be a positive asset to Canadian society if people help them individually. So I think every individual living in Canada have the capacity, have the ability as an individual to change somebody's life. And that is not one person's life. That person comes to Canada and supports his or her family in changing the future of a whole generation. And that generation will have money to go to school and not go to sleep hungry at night. So everybody that comes to safety, they work, they contribute, and for years they haven't had this opportunity to work. But as soon as they arrive here, they start working. They go back to school.
And
They
just
get
on a tangent, a lot of people that come to those countries or that have always been in those countries, like Canada, especially with private sponsorship program, but also like developed countries in general, like Germany, the US, and so on. It does strike me as quite amazing how much power you have as an individual just by being here, right? How much more people you can help and affect and influence by being in a free country. And yeah, there's so much you can do with your voice, with your money, with your time, and most people around the world just don't have that possibility. So yeah, it's an incredible amount of power that so many people just aren't even aware they have. But on that thought, do you want to elaborate, Stephen, on what people in Canada specifically, maybe even around the world, can do to support your efforts, to be a part of this movement, and help refugees around the world?
Sure. So the Canadian private sponsorship program is unique. It's been imitated by a number of countries, but nobody's really nailed it yet in the way that Canada does and has since 1978 when the program was first created. There's now promises from the US that they're going to sort of imitate our program at a limited scale, limited numbers, kind of as a pilot project. Australia has a kind of bad version of private sponsorship. There's other countries that have, again, imitated it, but they always handicap it in some very crucial way. Like they ask too much money in the bank, or they ask for, the refugee to have an employment offer or something. Canada's version is very Canadian in that we are a country that likes to respect people from around the world and treat them as equal human beings. So in the private sponsorship program, all the processing is done while the person is still waiting to come. And when they arrive, they come as permanent residents. They are never refugees in this country. They are permanent residents, which means they can apply for citizenship within 3 years of arriving. And that's a very crucial thing because it means they have full access to education, healthcare, and so on. Full opportunity. So we're not treating them as like second-class citizens in limbo. We're treating them as permanent residents. And that's part of the reason why the program is so successful, that the person who comes is not a burden on society or on the private sponsors. They are equal members, largely, of society. They can do everything but vote, I would say. So it's a great program, and I think the people who get involved in it on the sponsor side typically find it like one of the most fulfilling things that they've done in their lives. So you can sort of have a kid, watch the kid get married and go to university. Those are pretty fulfilling. I would say private sponsorship would be like a close number two to that sort of feeling of life satisfaction. In that you sort of pluck somebody out of limbo and out of suffering and out of years of hopelessness and allow them to start a new life. And it's really very wonderful to be part of, and I would definitely recommend it. We do have a website called Northern Lights Canada. Probably you'd want to put the word refugees in the search so that you don't get like northern tourism. And that website exists to sort of guide and inform people. And if you are listening and you are in Canada outside of Quebec and you do want to be part of this, I encourage you to check out the website, read up. Every question you could ever have is probably answered on that website. And if you're still interested after all that reading, reach out to me and I'll do my best to sort of facilitate matching you with somebody who might be a good fit for you as a sponsor, or just helping with the application, you name it. I'll try to, either myself or one of the volunteers will try to sort you out.
Yeah. And Zach and I have so many people we'd like to help get sponsored, and now I might actually be able to sponsor one of them here.
In the U.S.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good topic. There's a bit of misunderstanding right now. So, I mean, you probably know as an American better than me, but there's this Welcome Project, which is US's version of private sponsorship. But Phase one, which we're still in, is not what we would call classic private sponsorship. It's more, the Canadian version is BVOR, Blended Visa program. And in that program, you agree to sponsor somebody that is sort of then assigned to you by having been vetted by the UNHCR. So you don't have that kind of direct ability to sponsor someone you want. And it's also not very clear how one gets on that list of the UNHCR advising US that, how you become one of those candidates. So I still got people saying, oh, I'm going to be sponsored to the US. And it's like, no, you're not under this current program. But they did promise a phase two later in 2023, where you could actually choose the person you want to sponsor. And that would put the US in more the zone of what Canada is doing. But as always, they've handicapped it. Every time a country does one of these things, they always handicap it, I guess, for fear of political blowback. So the current handicap that we're hearing, and it hasn't been publicly announced, with the US program is that they're going to have like a cap of 5,000 people at first. And Canada brings in, I don't know, like 40,000 refugees through private sponsorship a year. So 5,000 in a country the size of the US is really a very tiny drop in the bucket. So I would tell people, keep your eye on the headlines from that program, but don't have giant expectations. Also, because in the US, refugee policy is very much a political football, which it isn't in Canada. So in Canada, the private sponsorship program has been largely unchanged under Conservative government, Liberal government. None of them destroy it, as you might expect. In fact, they're all in favor of it, which is sort of a testament to the Canadian political spectrum, that all political parties are fans of Canadian private sponsorship of refugees. Whereas in the US, the moment they elect a non-Democrat party, that the entire program will be tossed out the window. And that's another sad thing. So I don't want to diss US too much, but I'd say keep your expectations in check when it comes to private sponsorship to the US.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I was really hoping for it, but maybe a sufficient number of calls to members of Congress will convince them to. Well, first of all, let us sponsor a particular refugee. I'd kind of like to know who's going to be staying with me before they come over.
Yeah, it's such an essential part of the program. Like you first of all, you want to choose someone that you're sort of simpatico with, and have something in common with, even though they're from a different culture. And during the 2-year wait, or before they come, typically the sponsors really create an enormous bond by having like weekly Zoom chats and English lessons and just sort of sharing sessions. And that's so important because that creates that bond. So when they come in, arrive in the airport, you already know them really well. You already have a relationship. Whereas if it's just, a stranger and it's sort of surprise, this is who you're getting, it tends to not go that well, to be honest. So
yeah, and it doesn't go that well with roommates. What do you
Yeah.
expect?
Yeah, exactly. Like, hello, this person is now your best friend, but you have nothing in common with them. So it's a really key thing. Canada has a BVOR program, this blended visa program, which is similar to the current US program, where you just sort of notionally agree to be a sponsor and then are sort of assigned somebody. And my neighbors did it. I think I'm the only one still talking to that family. I think the rest of my neighbors just sort of, as soon as the 12 months were over, were happy to walk away. Whereas with the private sponsorship program, the relationships you build can be a lifetime. Like you might be showing up at somebody's wedding 15 years from now, long after the 1-year sort of commitment is finished. That is very typical of the private sponsorship program.
I think we kind of went over it a little bit. What are the particular requirements to go through the private sponsorship program?
So on the refugee side, they need to have a official refugee status from the UNHCR or a national government, and has to be full refugee status, not asylum seeker. This is for Group of Five, and largely I'm involved in the Group of Five program. There's another one where a church can sponsor somebody, and that person or faith group, they're called sponsorship agreement holders. They can sponsor people without refugee cards, but the quantity is very limited. It's very hard to get the attention of one of those organizations. So yeah, if it's Group of Five, which is what I spend most of my time working on, You just need 5 people who have either permanent residence status or passports to be the sponsors, and they have to live in the same community. They can't be like all over the country. And they fill out some basic paperwork. There are 2 of them, 2 of the 5 have to create a bank account, a trust account, where the money goes, and Canada sets sort of limits as to how much, not like minimum limits of how much money has to be in the bank. And that's the money the refugee, when they become a newcomer and come here, live on when they during their first year. So, you know, the money has to be collected, put in that trust account as part of the process. Like you can't do it after the fact. It all has to come together. The sponsor applications, the refugee paperwork, the banking, all comes together in a single package, which is sent to immigration, and it's all got to be there simultaneously, which is why it's a lot of work. It's quite hard. I mean, it's easy for me because I've been doing it for years, but I would say for your average first-time person, they're going to need some guidance, which is sort of why Northern Lights exists.
So this money doesn't have to come from the sponsors themselves, right? Like it can come from donations or third parties or like even international benefactors and that kind of thing, or is it?
Yeah, it can come from anybody but the refugee, because Canada doesn't want a program where you can buy your way into, you know, immigration. The refugee program is not supposed to be a program you can sort of get in through being rich. So the money can come from anybody but the refugee. Typically I think in the old days, the sponsors would do everything. They do the paperwork and the fundraising and the settlement. What I've been finding in the last few years is those functions are kind of disaggregated. So the funding often comes from guilty Australians who know that they've created this terrible refugee system across that section of the world. Funding also can come from relatives and, you know, friends that have managed to start a life in a country like Norway or Australia. Sometimes the sponsors will do the fundraising, but it's enough to be a sponsor. Like that's asking a lot. So to ask a sponsor also to cover the costs is kind of, to me, asking a little too much. So sometimes sponsors have the means to do the fundraising or even funding, but typically they don't. As long as you have a good money trail of where the money came from as part of the application, and the money's not coming from the refugee themselves, then you're good. Immigration likes that.
Yeah. And I mean, I have $2,000 in an account to sponsor Emad.
Yeah, you just need 14,500 more and you're good.
Oh, 2,000 you did? Oh, 2,000 US, not quite that much.
Yeah, okay, so yeah. Now under the US Welcome Project, I think the sponsors need to cough up like something like $3,000. Yeah, there is a financial commitment on the sponsor side, but it's higher in Canada because it's private sponsor. It's not a mix. The money is not coming from the government at all. It's coming from anywhere else. That's what makes it the private sponsorship program.
So how many people have you sponsored so far?
I am very rarely an actual sponsor on paper. I like to keep my sort of sponsorship in reserve for cases that really, you know, we've got 4, we can't make 5, we really can't. We tried. Then I have submitted hundreds of applications over the years, like 300, maybe more. But am I the actual sponsor on paper? Very, very rarely. I figure my time is better used like helping other sponsor teams.
So hundreds, that is actually quite impressive.
Yeah, it's a lot. But, you know, like here I am at the home of somebody who I didn't sponsor but helped sponsor, with somebody cooking who I also didn't sponsor but helped sponsor. And last night we had a get together with a whole bunch of other newcomers who, you know, same thing. And we rolled around in the snow and had a dance party, and it was a lot of fun. So the side benefit for me is a lot of socializing and good times once people come here.
Yeah, it really does kind of create a lifelong bond. You help someone get to safety, and there's a community aspect to it that I think is very heartwarming there.
Yeah, and one thing that David Barnes, who is one of our sort of super sponsors, he sort of does what I do, which is put together sponsor teams for people. One thing he always points out is that, you know, how much you get out of it as a sponsor both in terms of learning from the people, the newcomers, and their sort of different perspectives and cultural richness, but you also get a lot out of connecting with other sponsors and volunteers, because the people who get into this space tend to be caring humanitarians with a lot to offer. And you get to meet those people in a way that you never would otherwise. You probably wouldn't meet them through work or family necessarily. And it's great. Like it's like this sort of secret network of people you never knew existed. And now you're connecting with them and part of their lives. That is a sort of very big side benefit of getting involved in private sponsorship.
And yeah, so much of my work, I don't think I've met anybody I've been working with on refugee issues in person. The ones who are from the U.S. are from the other side of it.
I know that feeling. Like the three of us have known each other for years, never met in person. I would say 80% of my Facebook friends are people I've never met in person. But it's really the amazing power, I guess, of social media. Like when it hasn't always been this way. I remember there's a guy I know who was privately sponsored, Syrian guy out of Jordan, and he found his sponsors himself through social media back in 2016. And it was so unusual at that point, so fast time flies, that he was like featured in the Toronto Star, which is our biggest publication in this country, as like, this guy found his sponsors through social media, not through any organization. And it was like blew everyone's mind. That has since become the de facto, like that, there's no other way to do it. Like this is private sponsorship. How am I going to connect with the refugee if it's not through social media? Like it is, there's no other way. But at the time it was so unusual that it warranted a national publication to draw attention to it. It was just it's a crazy thing. And some of the interventions we've done over the years, like the Hassan Kantar thing. I remember when it first got around that, oh, there's this guy stuck in an airport in Malaysia, we sort of immediately put together this sort of SWAT team that had, 2 Americans, a bunch of Canadians, a woman in that part of the world who was connected to the king in that part of the world, like this crazy motley crew of people who were all just kind of, we got to help this guy. And there were a million plans bouncing around, you can go to Argentina, you can go to this place, that place. He ended up coming to Canada, I think, as a testament to this is the most realistic option for somebody in his shoes. But that was just like, wow, these people, we are working to change a life, and I will probably never meet any of them in person. That's the world we live in. I want to touch on it again, that I don't want to like over-represent what Northern Lights is or can do. It's kind of in a way a fictional organization. Anybody who wants to volunteer and get involved in private sponsorship, I consider a member of Northern Lights. Northern Lights sponsors nobody. No, Northern Lights has never sponsored anybody. I don't even think it can sponsor anybody. This is something you've got to get your head around, that the Canadian Private Sponsorship Program in the Group of 5 model, there are no organizations involved. And this is what's so mind-blowing, because every other kind of immigration stream in every country around the world, it's always handled by organizations. It's UNHCR or it's this or it's that. In this case, Canadian immigration processes you, but the sponsors are just 5 caring people and not belonging to any organization. That's a different kind of refugee stream. And in a similar way, Northern Lights just facilitates all these groups of 5. It never appears on the application. It has absolutely no official role in any application. It's just really there as a kind of free service to guide and instruct and help facilitate private sponsorship without actually being an official part of a single application.
So I suppose we can think about Northern Lights not so much as an NGO as much as it is a network of sponsors and activists that want to network and help refugees come to Canada, right? It's
yeah, so it does have not-for-profit status. Like we did file. This was where David was pushing me. He's the co-founder. He's savvier at how having an official status as an organization sort of gives credibility and can open doors and expand your scale. The organization, it's an official not-for-profit, but when it comes to immigration applications, it plays no role except as a kind of background invisible facilitator.
I suppose that also makes sense for tax reasons, right? When you take the donations and all of that.
No, so in Canada we have not-for-profit and we have charity. Only the charities can give tax donations. Northern Lights is not a charity. It's a not-for-profit, so it's at a lesser level of official organization. Can't offer you charitable receipts at all. One day maybe we'll apply for charitable status, but I like keeping it on the grassroots level, where we don't have a governing board telling us what to do and so on. We can be very nimble in responding and pivoting according to the need. And we can do that because we don't have that kind of organizational strictures that a charity, for example, would have.
Definitely sounds a lot better than trying to marry somebody so one or the other can get into the country.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of kinds of immigration, and they're all great for different niche reasons. But when it comes to refugees who've got nothing but their own sort of selves to offer society, this private sponsorship is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, one last point I wanted to touch on before we wrap this up. You mentioned something about the Archipelago project that Shams and John were involved in back in Indonesia before they got to Canada. Is that how you got to know them, got to know about their stories, and started connecting with them? Yeah, building on that. It is something that, even though it's not the topic of this episode, I did want to briefly introduce a project that's giving a voice to victims of genocide, essentially people who have been through a lot and have had to stay in places like Indonesia for many years just to get to safety and start a life of their own.
Yeah. I'm happy to answer this one. So Shams and John are cooking breakfast. You might hear frying noises, so I'll have to answer for them, which is too bad because they are the experts, not me. So the Archipelago, I would encourage people to check out. It's a publication by and for refugees, but also to raise awareness of that isn't covered. A lot of this stuff isn't covered in mainstream media, and especially Australian mainstream media. So Australia has largely the engineer of refugee policy in Indonesia, Malaysia, and that part of the world. But Australians, thanks to Rupert Murdoch, don't know a thing about it and live in this sort of media bubble of not knowing just this terrible system of entrapment that their country has created right across the region. I mean, we're talking about like a quarter of the world, the South Pacific, is all under this Australian sort of Pacific solution strategy. So because there isn't coverage in the media, it takes a little bit of extra work to bring attention to this situation. And John and Shams were both being published in mainstream media, some of which actually got through to Australia. But the Archipelago is sort of consistently doing that and has been since the two of them helped found it. And it's refugee voices that you don't necessarily hear or get to hear. And I would encourage people to definitely check it out. Yeah, that's what I'd say on that one. I can pull them in if you want to hear more, but I hear chopping, and I think John was a little miffed that he got halfway through frying the onions when I pulled him in last time.
Okay. Yes. Well,
yeah, no worries. We'll have some more time on a separate episode to talk to them and get more detail on this project, on their journeys, on their activism. I'm very excited about it. We're looking forward to continuing this conversation, kind of. But yeah, for now, I suppose. We've covered everything that we have to cover. Thank you so much for your time, Stephen. Thanks to Shams and John for being here.
Yeah, and thanks you guys for doing this, because this is all important stuff, and getting, as we've just been talking about for the last hour or so, getting the word out is can be hugely impactful. If people don't know what their options are or what their governments are doing, then nothing will ever change. So it all starts with raising awareness.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to also say thank you for your time, Stephen, and for everyone listening, thank you for listening to us. Come back later when we interview Shams and John, hopefully, among others.
Yep, have a good night. This has been
ahead,
the Emancipated Citizen Podcast. and we'll see each other in the next one.